teachers, since before the pandemic, have been using software controlled by ed tech companies. The control of our curriculum and of their work has been privatized.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So we've seen a lot of discussion lately in right-wing media and among Republican officials about school choice. They even have a little school choice week. We know that warring with public schools and universities and the unions representing those workers appears to be a key component of Ron DeSantis's presidential campaign. It's been in the news quite a bit lately. And we expect political attacks on public education in Alabama to ramp up. And it's important that educators, alongside the working class families that are served by public schools, it's important they be informed and they be organized to face these threats ahead. And one thing that I want to acknowledge is that we know public schools have their challenges and their flaws. We know there are legitimate problems to be solved. But the solutions won't come from the very same corporate and reactionary forces who've played a major role in causing these problems in the first place. We're asked to believe that introducing more profiteering off our children will somehow result in less corruption and better quality. But the evidence, of course, says otherwise. I want to be really clear that the school choice push is not about what's best for kids. It's about money, and it's about reactionary, segregationist ideology. The alternative is that we demand great public schools for every child, in every family, in every community. It's not just about your family or my family, it's about the public as a whole. So with that preamble out of the way, really excited to bring Dr. Lois Weiner on the show. She is a longtime educator, activist, and scholar. She's the author of regular articles in multiple books, specializing in urban teacher education and teacher unionism, all with a commitment to social justice and to the rank and file. I believe every educator and ally should be reading her stuff because of her sharp analysis of the intersection of labor and public schools.
Dr. Weiner, thanks for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Adam talked about this preamble and we've been tracking a lot of fights in education, particularly around vouchers and privatization and things like that. And I do want to, we definitely want to circle back to that conversation with you because I think that we think that you've got really interesting things to say about that. But the reason that we brought you on today is to talk about your recent piece for Truth Out. Labor and education activists must challenge private tech. And, fighting technology was really not on my radar. Everybody touts technology as like this big, great thing, iPads in schools and stuff like this. And so what have I been missing here?
Well, you're not the only one who's been missing it, I have to say, so you can't beat yourself up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
But I have to start off by saying that Adam's remarks were so great, I almost feel like I'm superfluous. So I'm really glad that you started off with that question. And I'll use your term circle back. But before I do that, I have to tell you, your show is so great. And it's so important. And I really do hope that people donate because I don't think that we can really revive the labor movement in this country unless we organize the South. We must organize the South. It's not an original idea of mine. Stanley Aronowitz talked about it, I think, brilliantly and completely in almost everything that he wrote. And of course, to organize the South, we have to deal with racism and social justice because the two are connected. And the other thing I want to say is that, this vernacular about this language about school choice, it's really important to understand that it echoes the same lies in the term right to work. What does right to work mean? Right to work means the right to work for slave wages under conditions that the wealthy and the powerful and the boss set for us. What's school choice about? The choice of attending any school that billionaires, wealthy elites, and the people who I'll call the ruling class determine is what we should have for an education. And the reason education is so much in the news, and the reason the attacks on public education and teachers unions is so powerful, is that, number one, education in every society is the way we reproduce the society. We either reproduce everything that's crummy about it, or we reproduce what's good. To reproduce what's good, it means we have to disrupt things in the present system of public education. And it is that disruption of inequality and injustice that the right wants to end. That's what these attacks on public education and teachers unions are about. So there's no separating the so-called culture wars from the privatization of public education. And it is shocking and shameful that the leadership of both teachers unions has not made that connection between the privatization and the profiteering, the inroads of the ruling class, their control of policy or their influence in policy in both political parties. It's just a disgrace that the leadership of both unions have not made that connection. And they allow the right to separate. They allow DeSantis to separate the culture wars, his attack on transgender youth, on the most vulnerable, the rollback of all the gains that the disability rights movement, not to speak about gender equity, reproductive freedom, right, and racism. There is absolutely no separating those. And a great article by Maurice Cunningham in the National, in the NPE newsletter that I tweeted it. He just makes that connection. These parent groups are being funded by the far right. Why have our unions not been talking about that, right? These are astroturf groups. Okay, now that I've said that, let me go back to what people are not talking about.
No, absolutely. And while you're talking about that, I mean, I don't follow. I'll take your word for it about the teachers unions. They're not making this connection. I don't follow them as much as you and Adam do, but the connection is not difficult to make. I mean, any of these, especially now. I mean, maybe at the beginning there was this faux distinction between these movements, but anytime you just have one of these videos of, in some cases, it's just a video of a teacher who is gay, right? And that's the extent of the controversy in the video. And then sometimes, you have teachers who are just people, who are just workers, saying like weird things or, things that are maybe not exactly the way that they ought to be said or something, or they're going outside of the curriculum. And, I'm not opposed to saying that, there are times when people make mistakes and people do things that they shouldn't be doing, and that's fine. But every time that one of these videos crops up, every time, in the comment sections is full, the quote tweets are full with school choice now, school choice now, school choice now, which is just privatization. It's just taking money from the public and funneling it into these private systems.
It's more, Jacob, it's more. And we have to say that it's more. It's not just a matter of profit. It's also a matter of ideological control. Right. And it's a matter of controlling what's taught, what's learned, and teachers' work. That's what I'm talking about with the reproduction of the society. And the technology piece fits into that. The reason it's important to understand, it's not just about money. Of course, in the last analysis, in the broad analysis, what the unions are missing that you just described is a class analysis, which neither union talks about. They don't talk about the working class.
Right.
The only people who talk about the unions don't talk about the working class, right?
Right.
The Democratic Party certainly won't talk about the working class because it's looking to get suburban middle class voters to support them. But the unions should be talking about the working class. The union should also be talking about capitalism, which is something that everybody does but the unions. Only the unions don't talk about capitalism. Isn't that peculiar?
Right.
Or interesting?
Right.
Right? They're afraid to talk about capitalism, right? So, and what's interesting to me is that when Sanders talked about capitalism, he was very appealing and he talked about the working class. He made inroads into into a demographic that the Democratic Party actually wrote off, right? Which is white workers, people with less than a college education. Okay, but to get to what my most recent work has been, and I'm so glad you've asked me because I feel sort of like Cassandra about this, and I don't think it's too late for us to do something about it, but they've already made the ruling class has already made extraordinarily powerful inroads in changing teachers' work. And they did that through standardized testing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't separate back 15 years ago, in education, we heard about data-driven decisions, evidence-based education, right? The question is always, whose evidence? What questions are you using? Who's making the decisions about what evidence, right? And the origin, although the rationale for standardized testing has always been equalizing educational opportunity. That was the rationale when standardized testing was first introduced in the Johnson era reforms, the war on poverty, right? But that rationale was exploited for very different usage and for very different purposes. During the Obama administration in particular. And that rationale about equalizing educational opportunity was used to support the use of standardized tests to control everything in education, including standards. And if you look at where the standards come from, that the schools that the standardized tests are based on that are used in this country, no parents, no teachers, nobody, students, nobody was involved in developing those standards the evidence that people are judged on in the standardized tests, the curricula, right? Nobody. Those standards were developed by international finance organizations like the OECD and the World Bank. And a lot has been written on that. And that's like volumes have been written. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's fact.
Right.
The standards are used globally. They're globally, and it's about international competition. International competition to have a workforce that can compete in the 21st century. So as soon as you see that rationale, you know that what's going on is education, control of the education of workers and of work. Now we come to information technology. What's the role of information technology what's its relationship to work? Well, its relationship to work is that it's transforming work. It's altering who does what and how, right? It's impoverishing the way information technology has been used. Take the algorithms that are used for food delivery, the algorithms that are used for Uber drivers, the algorithms that are used in almost every occupation, right? To determine what your job is, right? Working class jobs, not even just in working class jobs. So just since the beginning of the year, there have been so many articles about AI. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why all of a sudden all these articles about AI? I mean, information technology has been altering work for the last 15 years. And it's also altered education. Teachers, since before the pandemic, have been using software and platforms controlled by ed tech companies. It's privatized. The control of our curriculum and of their work has been privatized. Teachers have been using assessments, supposedly of kids' social and emotional learning, right, on platforms, filling out assessments of kids at recess. Now, what happens to that data? Number one, that data follows the kids. There are no controls on what happens to that data in terms of following the kids or their parents. There are inadequate controls, almost no or inadequate controls on that data being sold, bought and used. And every day we see in the papers, if you read the business sections especially, you see another expose about how data has been misused. I just saw something about a health app being sued belatedly. I want to point out that the World Development Report of 2 years ago talked about the need for capitalism to start policing, better policing the use of data. So these exposés about how our data has been used without our knowing it, and the imposition of what seem to be privacy controls, has to be understood as capitalism understanding that they have to act like they really care about what happens to us. But in fact, while these significant but not life-altering or work-altering exposés are occurring, what's happening at the same time, at the very moment, is the explosion of the use of AI. AI is already being used in test preparation. Let's think about what that means in teaching, where most of teaching is now test preparation because standardized tests drive the curriculum. What does that mean? What that means is that a future has been prepared for us in which neither teachers, students, parents, nor even elected government officials control what is taught or how. It is an effort to alter, completely change teachers' work. Completely change teachers' work. The curriculum will be set by these international authorities. Teachers will use, to some extent, platforms that have been created for them, right? And students will learn how to compete for jobs in an economy and in workplaces that the boss controls with things like AI.
Right. Right. I mean, it's like getting them ready, because so much of this is like getting you ready for the workforce. And I'm glad you mentioned in terms of the algorithms and how that's affecting working people, because you're seeing a lot of the same trends filtering down into the schools, not just for the educators themselves, but for the students and the way they're being taught.
Warehouses.
Right.
It's the Amazon warehouses, right? Their work is not, they don't control. It's like the speed of the assembly line, right? The having somebody actually control the assembly line is now actually, that has been replaced with algorithms and surveillance.
Yeah. Yeah. I
right?
mean,
The
it's,
surveillance of technology.
yeah. And that's the thing that, I'm glad you incorporated that, because public education is facing attacks and challenges from so many multiple directions, and we have to connect those dots, and we can't leave the technology piece out of that puzzle, right? That's a very important piece of the puzzle that fits in to this broader picture of control, of decision making. And one thing that I really loved about the way you opened that article is commenting on the fact that conventional wisdom has been accepted as conventional wisdom by unfortunately too many educators, but certainly by most politicians and others, that the education of children is to prepare them for the workforce, right? College and career readiness. That's all we ever hear about. And there is something just, to me, very sad that we have abandoned the humanistic ideals that was behind the push for public education in this country in the first place. That there's an idea that we, the public, benefit from having an educated public. And we, as the public, see a benefit in investing in young people, that they can realize their potential and receive a holistic education so that they can live up to that potential, whatever that may be. And it has just, over the years, it has just slowly but slowly morphed into, it is career prep, it is workforce prep. And of course, for most working class people, these are the experiences you're getting prepared for, right? The Amazon warehouse worker experience. So I really appreciate you putting that out there. I wanted to ask a little bit about some of the other threats to public schools and how they fit into that. A couple of things you mentioned would be voucher programs and then the wars around curriculum. And I'm so glad you emphasized earlier that this is not like a separate arena of culture war over here and then privatization over there. The two are so linked together. So I don't know if that's not much of a question really, but if there's anything you want to kind of expand on that, how does some of these other attacks on public schools fit in?
It's more than they're being linked. I want to say it's frequently people say to me, well, how do we reconcile the union's responsibility to defend workers' economic self-interest with these social justice issues?
Right.
And my answer is they're the same project. They're the same project. The ruling class doesn't separate them.
Right.
They don't separate them. They manipulate. They manipulate anger, frustration, and fear about social change for their own end. And what is their end? Control of society and profit. That's their end. So they don't separate them. Why do we in the labor movement? Or why do we on the left? They're the same project. They're absolutely the same project. That's why I talked about the relationship between right to work and vouchers and school choice. Destroying public education, destroying, it's not public education, because public education, if we understand public education as a system that's publicly funded and publicly controlled, that's what they want to destroy. But what is the public there? The public is democracy. And the original slogan of the AFT, John Dewey, was that we needed democracy in education and education for democracy. They want to destroy democracy because democracy is a threat. It's as simple as that. That's why their claims about school choice and wanting every child to have access to a quality education is just orchestrated hypocrisy. That's what it is. It's orchestrated hypocrisy.
Right.
And it's orchestrated hypocrisy. Now, what they will say in response is something that Adam actually alluded to. Well, you're defending a system that was bad to begin with, that you're defending a system that never allowed equal educational opportunity. And I'm not defending that system.
Right. I mean,
I don't think there can be any return. There's no golden age to which we can return. And I think, Adam, it was great that he started off by saying that. I don't want to return to the old, but you don't have the right to determine what our future is going to be. And that's the question. Who determines our future? Who determines how we're going to use technology? Who determines that? And I am not afraid to have working people involved in those decisions and involved in those discussions. In fact, I welcome it. I welcome it. And there's some people say, well, some teachers say, well, we can't have parents involved. They don't know as much as we do. I don't think that's the case. I think that parents bring a kind of knowledge that we don't have. And the knowledge they have is of their children outside of school. And the knowledge they have is the community as they experience it. That doesn't mean the parents are right in everything that they want for their kids. But it does mean that our job as educators is to be in conversation with parents and community, and to not write them off as deplorables or being captured by the churches, or because that means that people, when we do that, that means that we're rejecting a central tenet of our profession, which is that people are educable.
Absolutely.
Right? People are educable. And the question is, how do we engage with them? And I think one of the best places for that engagement is in our role as teachers. But for that to happen, we have to look outside of our classrooms. We have to look outside of our classrooms. We cannot just shut the door. I just read a piece. Someone asked me, well, how do you know about everything that's going on with technology? And the way I know is not by reading what people in education are saying. What I know is by reading the publications about education and ed tech that are put out by businesses. Mm-hmm. And boy, are they sophisticated. They are so much more sophisticated than the unions. I have to tell you, the right and the neoliberals are so much more sophisticated than the unions. They have this project called the Progressive Policy Institute, and they even sell merch at the Progressive Policy Institute. The Progressive Policy Institute is neoliberal. It self-identifies as neoliberal. So they've even usurped that term, progressive. Right?
Oh my gosh.
That's right. They've usurped our language. We can't be afraid to say the truth. I think that's it. We can't be afraid to say the truth. And we have to say, if you are giving recommendations about teaching and you are not looking outside of the classroom about what is happening in work, then your recommendations are not ones that we should be taking. And that's what I say to all of these articles that are about how to use the chatbot and AI. I'm not reading, it's not a matter of reading. Don't trust anybody who is not talking about the way AI is degrading work, because we have to make our decisions and the reasons that AI is being used in the way that it is, not for our benefit, for theirs.
Right.
Of course, and what you mentioned about the business publications is really such an important and really unfortunate thing. But it's something that many people have mentioned, that the business, if you go and you read the Wall Street Journal, the business press type stuff, their news sections are generally really good and sophisticated and accurate because the owning class needs to understand what's happening so that they can they can make their decisions about how to fight working people, right? And I saw somebody, I think maybe it was Doug Henwood on Twitter, say that you'll see a lot of vulgar Marxist analysis in the business press, and because because that it's pretty explanatory in a lot of instances, right?
Well, you understand what they're thinking, right? You understand what they're thinking, but the other thing about reading these ed tech newsletters and magazines, I actually posted on Facebook an article that was extraordinary about what their plans are. Not their plans, what's underway. And somebody went to try to read the report. And the report to get a copy of the report cost $5,000.
Wow.
Now, why? Who's their audience? It's not public school teachers.
Right.
It's not researchers like me, right? Who's their audience? People in Silicon Valley and Wall Street who want to know where to invest their money. And we have to be looking at the way technology is transforming work and to understand what is going on in our classrooms and our work. That's it. And they're already, I once heard Ursula Hughes say, she's a UK researcher who does research for unions about use of technology. And this is many years ago. She said, by the time the unions come to me and they say they want help, it's too late because the project has already been done. The jobs have already been outsourced. There's nothing they can do to keep the project from proceeding. Now, I don't think we're there yet with AI. I don't think we're there yet with AI. But I think what we want to say to parents, unless you want your children to have a job that's being destroyed by technology, a job in which their bodies are going to suffer, because algorithms are going to control the pace of work, and because they're not going to have any say in the conditions of their labor, you need to join with us. You need to join with us in stopping this standardized testing, because this standardized testing is the root of their control. Now, what are we going to say about equality? We're going to say there are good measures of how to judge what kids are learning other than the standardized tests. They cost more money, they require professional judgment, and we need to have parents and community involved in our using them and disseminating the results. But Wayne Al has a new book about that, where he talks about the alternatives to standardized testing as a means of assessment and evaluation. And we have to be talking about that in this discussion of learning loss. That's what we have to talk about. What does that mean? What did they really lose?
Right. Yeah, I've been wondering, what did they lose exactly? You've kind of alluded to it a little bit in terms of some of maybe the lack of response from union leadership, and you and I talked before the show. I'm certainly very familiar with with union leadership not getting this, and just either not wanting to understand it, but they're certainly not understanding it in many cases. The multi-front piece to this. How do you think rank and file educators are responding, or maybe more appropriately should be responding? And you've spoken a little bit about this in terms of coalition with parents and students and communities. But as we wrap up here, what's kind of your final message maybe to Alabama educators? And I also want to say we're going to have you back on, because I have a lot more I'd love to talk with you about. But to any Alabama educators out there listening, do you have some messages for them in terms of how they should respond?
Well, I want to say not just Alabama educators, but people who care about what goes on in schools, right? And that means
Absolutely.
workers as well, whose kids are in school, not just teachers, or people who work in schools. I think that we need to defend the dignity of our labor.
Amen.
And people go into teaching because they're looking to make a difference in the world. They want to make a difference, though, by influencing individual kids' lives. And our capacity to do that is shrinking by the minute because the conditions of our labor have been altered without our consent and without our involvement. And to me, that's our struggle. That's our challenge, and our professional obligation is to push back on the degradation of our work and the attack on the motives on our ideals, as our professional ideals. And one of the most potentially powerful means we have of doing that is by organizing as workers. And if the unions or the organizations that say they represent us are unwilling or unable to do that, then what we have to say and do is say, move over and let people who understand that we have to fight and that time is running out and that our kids and our profession matter, move over and let us do it.
Amen. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yep.
Good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weiner.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
your time.
inviting me, and I'd love to come back. I think your
Awesome.
work is great,
Absolutely.
and I'm going to write you a check.
You are so sweet. Well, thank
Thanks
you very
much.
much. And I really
you for
enjoyed it.
inviting me.
And we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We've got some great discussion in the chat about some of this, and one of the things that Free American 2020 in the chat mentioned is that our schools only focused only on college, and we harmed many kids. That's that's really going to what, Adam, you were saying about the college and workforce preparedness of school today,
Right. And of course that depends on, what family you're coming from and what neighborhood you're in, right? Because there's some schools where there's a recognition that most of the kids who are coming from poverty are not going to college, right? So they are more explicit, I believe, in preparing them to go work in manufacturing and logistics and things of that nature. But you're right. I mean, so many folks were pushed towards that. And that, brings up other issues in terms of trade unions needing to be inside our schools and talking to students about the opportunities they have there. There's a lot more we could dig in for sure, But really appreciate everybody tuning in and participating in the chat. And definitely enjoy talking with Lois.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project. And you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.